Okay. The story is called The Dry Bones, and I wrote it while I was sitting in the emergency waiting room at, well, that's not true, but anyway, it's a story that has to do with me going to the emergency room in the middle of the night at Kaiser Permanente. It was just past midnight and I was stumbling down the hallway. "Come on, feet," I said. "I'm only trying to get to the bathroom to take a pee." But my feet would not obey me, and as I made my way to the bathroom, I stumbled, crashing into the wall. The house was pitch black, because that's the way I liked it. I hate light, so during the day, I have blankets draped over all of my windows. At night, I try not to let any street light leak into the house. When I got into the bathroom, I thought I was walking towards the toilet, but instead I walked into the wall and my head smashed against the mirror. After much thrashing about, I found the light switch and flipped it on. I looked like a casualty from the Great War. Blood streamed down my face, staining my lips and teeth. When I finally located it, it was only a small gash above the eye. Are you timing this to see how long? But I could see that it was very deep. I peed and felt somewhat better. I thought maybe I should go to get the thing stitched up, but the idea of going to the emergency room in the middle of the night was unthinkable. Then, as I made my way back to bed, I fell again and crashed onto the floor. As I tried to stand, the room started spinning, and, as John Lennon said, I fell into a dream. Now I was scared. Maybe I've had a stroke, I thought. As I lay on the floor, I went into a full-blown panic attack. If I don't do something fast, I'm going to die right here on my stupid floor, I thought. There was no longer any choice. Slipping into some jeans and a t-shirt, I grabbed my bag, stuck a couple of books in. If you've ever gone to the emergency room on a Friday night, you know that you'd better bring some books. I made the 4 miles to Kaiser Permanente in a flash. I hate Kaiser Permanente with a hatred that is beyond description. Both my father and my mother had died there, but that's another story. Unfortunately, it was the only medical coverage I had, so there was no choice. When I got to the counter, the girl behind the desk didn't even look at me. Apparently, she didn't notice that there was a human being standing in front of her. After what seemed like an eternity, the girl finally looked up from her computer. "Your membership card," she said nastily. I don't know why so many of those girls behind the hospital counters are so nasty, but they are. I tossed my Kaiser card down on the counter, doing my best imitation of Gary Cooper in High Noon. "That'll be $50, she said. I threw 2 20s and a 10 down on the counter with an even bigger dose of hostility than I had my membership card. I wanted her to know how much I hated her. The waiting room was packed. A whole bunch of people were squished together onto an ugly yellow couch. Behind them, a few people who had stolen chairs from another waiting room sat silently. Everybody was watching a tiny TV screen affixed to the wall. Even though the sound was off, the waiting room people watched intently. Nobody said a word, except for a couple of teenage girls attired in spangly t-shirts. They were yucking it up about some reality TV show called Rock of Love. I had no intention of joining the group. I reeled back to the counter with the nasty girl behind it. "I think I'm having a heart attack," I said, clutching my chest. "Oh my God," I cried, hamming it up. "Please, I've got to see a doctor right now." "Triage," said the girl behind the counter, banging on the door behind her. A moment later, a dark-skinned woman with a turban on her head opened the 2 metal doors that separated the emergency room from the waiting room and motioned me inside. Without saying a word, she slapped a blood pressure cuff onto my forearm. "What's wrong?" she said. "I had this pain right here," I said, pointing to my heart. "And then I fainted 3 times. How you get this?" she said, dabbing at the cut above my eyebrow. I guess I got it when I fell." The woman reached into a drawer, pulling out something that looked like a stapler. "Pop, pop, pop." She put an ace bandage over the cut and gave me a once-over. "Don't worry," she said. "No scar. Stitches disappear in about a week." Then she took me by the hand and led me to a dirty brown chair in the hallway. "You sit here," she said, then turned and walked away. The first thing I noticed about the emergency room was that it was totally freezing in there. My lips were chattering all over the place, so I zipped up my sweatshirt. Then I pulled the hood up over my head. I liked having my hood up like that. It felt safe in there. As I sat on the chair, I saw people being wheeled in and out of the room on stretchers. Some were young, some were old, but none of them looked very happy, except for one old lady who smiled crazily as she was being toted along by two men wearing blue ambulance driver uniforms. "Wee, wee, wee," she laughed as they wheeled her down the hall. I looked at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I sang, playing an imaginary guitar to the Chuck Berry riff that had just popped into my head. Time seemed to have stopped inside the ER. I knew I'd been sitting on that chair for a long time, but it didn't bother me. In a weird way, I was kind of enjoying myself. Then, a pretty girl with dark hair falling around her shoulders approached me. "Hi," she said, much too enthusiastically. "I'm Tina. I'm your nurse." Well, this isn't going to be so bad after all, I thought. Tina escorted me into a room, gave me the standard hospital gown, and told me to take off my clothes. Then she turned and left, not bothering to close the curtain all the way. I'd always hated those gowns because no matter how much you try to cover yourself up, invariably your butt or something else is still hanging out all over the place. Suddenly I heard screaming coming from the room across from me. "God, God, God," it went. I peeked through the curtain. A wizened old lady was lying on her side, all scrunched up in the fetal position. She looked completely dehydrated. Her skin was dry and brittle. In fact, the skin seemed so thin that you could almost see the bones popping out from beneath her flesh. I was tempted to go get her a glass of water, except I didn't know where to get one. "No, no," she screamed. Even though her screaming was really loud, nobody came into the room to help her. After a while, she got quiet again. Well, what do I do now? I thought. I tried to walk to the bathroom, but my legs were wobbling all over the place. Geez, I thought, maybe I really did have a heart attack, or at least a stroke. Actually, I was kind of hoping I did because I didn't want to have wasted a trip to the emergency room. After what seemed an eternity, Tina came back into the room, accompanied by a crinkle-faced old hag of a nurse wearing a pointed cap that made her look like the witch in The Wizard of Oz. The nurse sat down on the bed next to me, looking at her chart. "Touch your finger to your nose," she said. I did as I was bid. "Faster, faster," she commanded. I did a few more nose touches. "Now, touch your finger to my finger. Faster, faster, faster." Then she made me stand up and walk around the room. As I did, she took inspection, walking around me like a drill sergeant. When I was done, I sat back down on the bed. "Can I get a blanket or something?" I said. "I'm really cold." She reached into a closet and threw what looked like a pile of old rags at me. "Why do they keep it so cold in here?" I asked. The nurse looked at me as if I were a moron. "Bugs," she said. "Bugs? Do you know how many bugs are in this room right now?" she asked. "A hospital is one of the dirtiest places in the world, but the emergency room is the dirtiest place in the whole hospital." Then she got up and walked out, leaving me holding my pile of rags, which turned out to be sheets and blankets. After she'd left, I started thinking about what she'd said. I'd never considered it before, but actually it made sense. My God, there probably were really billions of poisonous microbes floating around right now, getting into my lungs and chest. I pulled the blankets over my head and tried to pinch my nose so that I wouldn't inhale any germs. But then I was distracted by a loud voice coming from the room adjacent to mine. I got up and peeked inside. There was a little old Jewish lady talking in Yiddish to a man who I figured was her husband. They seemed to be having a fight of some sort, and she was shaking her finger in his face. Though she was kvetching at him with great fervor, the husband didn't respond. He just looked bored by the whole thing. She'd probably been shaking her finger in his face like that for the last 30 years. A moment later, a doctor came into the room. Doctor, I can't make a PM." the woman said. She was talking so loud that everybody in the place could hear her. I tried and I tried. I tried 5 times, but it started to come out, but then it wouldn't come out all the way. The doctor mumbled something, but I couldn't hear what he was saying because the dry old lady had started screaming again. No, 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 don't do it. I walked a few steps closer to get a better look. She seemed to have almost disappeared now. Her skinny little body was all scrunched into a tiny ball at the foot of the bed. Occasionally the ball would wriggle about, but if it hadn't been for all the noise she was making, you'd have never known there was a person in there. Nurses and doctors, some young, some old, scurried through the ER. They all looked as if they had something very important to do. I watched a pretty young nurse and a ponytailed doctor go out into the hallway. I heard the girl laugh. I sneaked a little bit closer so I could hear them. I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but their talk reeked of sex. I wondered if working in a hospital would be a fun job. I'd thought about it a few times, but the closest I'd ever come was purchasing a pair of scrubs, putting on a stethoscope, which I'd stolen from my doctor's office, and walking around the hospital corridors looking very important. I used to do a lot of stuff like that when I was younger, but now I don't do it so much anymore. Only recently had I begun to feel my age, which, by the way, is none of your business. Let's just say that it's not a very funny number. Before, when your number was still funny, whenever you'd go to the hospital and you'd see all the dried up little old people shuffling about on their walkers or waiting in their wheelchairs, oxygen masks affixed to their faces, you'd never think of them as human beings, people like you. You'd think that they were another species of some sort. But then one day it dawns on you that sooner or later you're going to be one of those people. Maybe you don't have the wheelchair or the oxygen mask yet, but it ain't too far down the road, brother. And that's when you start thinking about God. You might not think about it too much, but brother, I'll tell you, you do think about Him. You'll be going about your business watching reruns of I Love Lucy or The Twilight Zone, and all of a sudden, God will come in and talk directly into your ear. There's no mistaking it. It is God. Period. And God says, will you listen to me now, my son? Would you shed your old life, give up your fleshly ways, and turn to me? He might not use those exact words, but that's the essence of it. And of course, you can either listen to those words and say, hey, don't bother me, or thanks, but not right now. Or you can say, maybe I'd better start listening. And even if you don't want to, sooner or later you'll realize that you've got to listen. In fact, if you really want however many days you've got left to count for anything, you'd better listen as much and as often as you possibly can. That's the only thing to do. Nothing else makes any sense. I looked at my watch. It was 6 a.m., but Chuck Berry was nowhere in sight. A couple of hours later, a bunch of stuff happened all at once. A nurse came into my room wielding a gigantic machine. She stuck it on my chest and took what I assumed was an x-ray. After she left, a doctor came in. He was this Chinese guy in his 40s with a bad case of acne. I immediately recognized the guy. He was the same doctor who'd come into the room to see my mother, who was in the emergency room after she'd had one of her strokes. My mother was really bad, and I recalled this guy laughing and patting her on the head. "You're going to be fine," he chortled, giving her another pat. I remember having to walk out of the room so that I wouldn't punch him. The doctor told me to stand up and balance on my toes. Then he pushed on my forehead. He held out his fingers. "Push finger," he said. "Now pull finger." I did the push-pull exercise a couple more times, after which he turned and scurried out of the room. A few minutes later, a Mexican guy who looked like he'd once been a boxer came in, put me on a gurney, and wheeled me out of the ER. For some reason, I liked this guy. "Why is it so damn cold in this place?" I asked him as he wheeled me down the hallway. "I don't know. It's stupid, man. But after a while, you just get used to it." He didn't say anything at all about bugs. I was wheeled into a room where a guy put a bunch of electrodes on my head. I knew they were testing for lesions in my brain or something like that. But in my mind, I thought maybe I was being tested to see if I had demons inside me, like that girl in The Exorcist. Sometimes I thought I really might have some demons. I mean, you never know about that kind of stuff, do you? After the test was finished, the Mexican guy came back and wheeled me back to my room. It was fun looking up at the ceiling and watching the lights go by. On the way, I saw Tina in the hallway. She was talking and laughing with a bunch of other nurses. I passed by her, but she didn't even look at me. "I'm really hungry," I said to Tina. "Can I get some Jell-O or something?" Tina looked up at me, but this time she didn't look so friendly. "I'll be with you in a minute," she snapped. I rolled past the room of the brittle old lady. For a minute I thought she was gone, but when I looked more closely I could see this lump moving around at the very bottom of the bed. My legs seemed to be working pretty well now. In fact, except for being so hungry, I felt pretty damn good. Then it struck me that except for the cut on my forehead, maybe nothing had happened to me at all. Maybe I just had a gigantic panic attack. I'd had panic attacks all my life, but in the last year or so, I got them much more frequently. A lot of days I couldn't even get out of my house because I was afraid a gigantic crack would open up in the sidewalk and swallow me up. I sat on my bed a while more. Through the curtains I could see the acne-faced doctor sitting behind a bank of computers. He was yucking it up with two other doctors about the results of the latest Lakers game. I got off my bed and pulled my gun around me and walked over to him. "You got any test results yet, Doc?" "Yeah," he said, bringing up the screen on his computer. "You fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You in good shape, man," he said, giggling to himself. "But what about my balance?" I said. "Is my balance okay?" "Yeah," he giggled. "Your balance is fine. You dance like a ballerina." "So, can I go home?" "Well," he said, "I gotta consult with another doctor. Maybe you stay." I felt my heart sinking. I didn't want to stay. All I wanted to do was to get the hell out of that place. "But doctor, if nothing is wrong with me, why can't I go home?" He turned his face and looked up at me for the first time. At first he looked grim, like a prison guard. The next moment he broke into a smile. His teeth were yellow. "Yeah," he giggled, "you go home." Back in my room I found 4 plastic containers of Jell-O, which had been tossed on my bed. I was so hungry that I ate all of them in one gulp. Then I took a good pee and started slipping on my clothes. The IV was still stuck in the back of my hand, so I began to remove it. Suddenly, Tina appeared in my doorway. She looked really angry. "Hey," she said, snatching at my arm. "You can't do that. That's my job." Then, in one swift motion, she grabbed my wrist, ripped off the bandage, and yanked the IV needle out of the back of my hand. Immediately, a huge welter of blood shot out, staining my shirt. Tina looked at me disgustedly. She reached into a cabinet, pulled out a gigantic hunk of cotton, stuck it over the open wound, and then slapped a swatch of tape over it. Still scowling, she handed me a sheet of paper. "Give this to the girl at the desk," she snorted. Then she turned huffily away and stomped off. I grabbed my bag and literally ran to the metal doors that would get me back to the real world. All I wanted to do now was to go to the Denny's around the corner and get a massive breakfast of bacon and eggs, after which I'd drink about 15 cups of coffee. When I got outside, I had to scrunch up my eyes because the sunlight was so bright. I looked at my watch. It was almost 2 p.m. I couldn't believe it. I'd been in that goddamn place for almost 13 hours. Yet somehow it seemed as if no time had passed. Before I went inside the Denny's, I bought a newspaper. It was odd because I hadn't read a newspaper in months. I didn't want to know what was going on in the world. All I wanted to do was to stay in my room with the blankets over the windows and watch TV with the sound off. But now I happily read the paper from cover to cover. I even read the sports section, though I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in sports. After I'd eaten my breakfast, I ordered another side of bacon and had 4 more cups of coffee. I felt great. When I approached the girl at the cash register to pay my tab, she looked at me kind of funny. "Your hand," she said. "Your hand is bleeding." I looked at my hand. Sure enough, the blood had leaked through the bandage and was dripping all over the place. "Here," she said, reaching down below the counter. "Let me put a new bandage on that for you." She brought out a cloth and dabbed at my hand, pressing it until the blood stopped. Then she put a fresh bandage over the wound. As I watched her patch me up, I realized that I'd seen her before. Even though I hadn't been in that particular Denny's for about 4 years, I remembered her. She was past 40 and wore no makeup to disguise it. Though she wasn't a knockout or anything, I suddenly thought that she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She had that odd kind of beauty that women in old Western movies often have. I felt my heart go bumpity-bump. All I wanted to do at that moment was to kiss her sweet, unlipsticked lips. I wanted to ask her if she'd leave her Denny's job and come out and live with me. We'd get the hell out of L.A., out of the filth and the muck, and go to some place that didn't have any Kaiser Permanente emergency rooms and all the poor, sad, brittle old people that were going to die there. "When you go home, you should change your shirt," she said, breaking my reverie. "Thank you," I said. Then I turned and walked out. But instead of going home, I decided to take a drive over Malibu Canyon and check out the beach.
Reach you on your cellular device.
As I drove over the canyon, I realized I couldn't... You need to get that?
No.
As
Turning
I
it off.
drove over the canyon, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd been to the beach. It must have been 10 years, maybe more. When I got to Malibu, it looked practically the same as I'd remembered it. I took off my shoes and ran down to the water. The waves were pretty good, and the surfers were getting some nice rides. Inside where the waves were just waist high, kids were either body surfing, riding boogie boards, or just playing in the water. I watched the slick bodies of the young boys and girls playing in the sea, laughing and skipping through the white wash of water. I knew I'd never be one of them again. Those days were gone forever. But for some reason, I didn't feel sad about that. I continued watching the body surfers. Someday they might be in the Kaiser emergency room with an oxygen mask affixed to their face. But right now, they didn't have to think about that. I sat there watching the people play in the water and listening to the sounds of the sea. As I sat there, suddenly the voice came into my ear. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely a voice I recognized. It was funny. I'd heard that voice all my life, though I didn't know who or what it was. Every so often I heard the dry, hellish screams of the brittle old lady in the hospital. There seemed to be a cruel laughter behind it, but I didn't pay any attention to the cackling. I just sat there, letting the waves and the voice of the Lord wash all the fear and sickness out of my body.
Almost 25 minutes.